Hello friends, I recently completed a third playthrough of Skyward Sword HD on Nintendo Switch, and I have to say that I really enjoy this game. It's got a wonderful story and some great, well-designed dungeons. In fact, I recently finished covering all of the dungeons in this game in my dungeon design series, so go check that out if you haven't already. But no game is perfect, that's the truth, and Skyward Sword is rather notorious for being one of the most divisive and least universally liked games in this series. Despite my own feelings on the game, that being that I love it, I understand many of the criticisms that the game received, and some of them are pretty valid points. In fact, I've got some pretty heavy criticisms of the game myself. So given the chance, if we could address those points and fix the game, how would we go about doing that? What changes would need to be made to correct these aspects of the game? That's the video's topic today, so let's take a look at how to fix The Legend of Zelda: Skyward Sword. So the first thing I'm going to get out of the way is that Nintendo already did fix many of the criticisms of the original game in the HD version for Switch. Things like the overbearing tutorials and Fi's interruptions were addressed already, so I won't be touching on those today. But there are still some things that were untouched and would require some work, and that's going to be my main focus today. So let's hop into it. Skyward Sword is a linear game. You're going to hear that from a lot of people, and while I don't think linearity is inherently a bad thing per se, especially when handled right, there are opportunities that the series has had to loosen up a bit. Opportunities that they haven't always taken. For example, the Wind and Earth temples in Wind Waker barely impact each other and could have been made in such a way that they could be completed in any order. But that's not the case. You have to do the Earth Temple first. Skyward Sword had a similar opportunity that it didn't take, and what I propose is an approach similar to that taken by A Link Between Worlds, which came out on the 3DS shortly after Skyward Sword. In short, the game shouldn't be entirely linear or non-linear. My proposition would be that the first 3 dungeons remain in their intended order, having us visit Skyview Temple in the Faron Woods first, then the Earth Temple in Eldin Volcano, and then the Lanayru Mining Facility in the Lanayru Desert third. This way, the game could still slowly roll out the story and the world map to us at a controlled pace, as it does in the final game. In the actual game, you next would have to visit the Ancient Cistern, the Sand Ship, then the Fire Sanctuary. My proposal would be to have these 3 dungeons able to be completed in any order. Truth be told, aside from a few minor obstacles, the dungeon order here doesn't feel that important to me. The Fire Sanctuary is the longest of the 3, but in terms of difficulty, they all feel rather comparable. There are a few obstacles that would need to be tweaked. For example, there is one room in the Sand Ship that you need the whip for, which is obtained in the Ancient Cistern, but truth be told, they could easily fix that by simply adding a claw shot target or removing the gap in this room. Giving us this morsel of freedom of player choice would go a long way to calming people's complaints about the game's rigid linearity, something made even more apparent during the Song of the Hero questline, which does exactly this idea, allowing you to complete its 3 sections in the various provinces in any order. Fast travel in some form or another has been present in this series since the very beginning, which makes its lack of inclusion in Skyward Sword even more confusing to me. The closest thing we have is the Loftwing amiibo, but even then, it's not really fast travel. It just warps you up to the sky as if you were interacting with one of the various statues around the world, and then it warps you back to there, rather similar to casting Farore's Wind in Ocarina of Time. Otherwise, the next closest thing is being able to fly up to the sky and then dropping back down to where you want to go, which is far more cumbersome than the warping seen in other Zelda games. This is a really easy fix, honestly. Just have these bird statues act as warp points, which you would unlock when you first interact with them, and then you're good. Honestly, this is exactly how pretty much every other 3D Zelda game handles fast travel, so it confuses me that they didn't do this at all. But maybe it's because if they did, we'd spend a lot less time flapping around the sky. Either way, it's a small tweak that would be very easy to implement without being Having a musical instrument in Zelda games is also not a new concept. Skyward Sword's instrument of choice is the harp, which makes a beautiful sound when strummed. The problem is that this strumming is all you can do. You can't play individual notes, which makes every song you learn in the game just a matter of strumming in time with some visual indicator, usually a little circle. Gameplay-wise, there is almost no distinction between any of the songs that you learn in Skyward Sword. Compare this to the songs learned in the N64 games or even in the Wind Waker, which offer far more precise control over the musical notes that you play, and it becomes clear right away that this just isn't as good. Because you're not really playing the songs, you're just strumming the harp strings back and forth, and so every song you learn in the game is just not memorable. The cutscenes for these songs look gorgeous and colorful, but I'll take memorizing and playing actual music over this any day, because when it comes down to it, playing music in Skyward Sword is all spectacle and no substance. Skyward Sword has 7 main dungeons. 6 of them are spread across the 3 provinces of the surface, while the final one is in the sky. This works pretty well as each dungeon is visually and thematically distinct from each other, except for the 2 in the Eldin province, the Earth Temple and the Fire Sanctuary, which are very similar in their aesthetics and themes, being that they're both fire dungeons. Now, I'm not saying that you can't have 2 fire-themed dungeons. Other games have done this, but if we look at Ocarina of Time, for example, they managed to make those repeated themes be pretty distinct from each other. These 2 dungeons fail to do that in my mind. I've covered this already extensively in another video, so I'll be brief, but it would have gone a long way had they made these 2 dungeons just a little more different from each other. My final point here is the boss battles. Overall, I'd say this is somewhere where Skyward Sword is really hit or miss. At its best, the boss battles are incredible and some of the most creative and fun in the series. At its worst, these boss battles are some of the most unengaging, boring, or just laughable in the series. Fights like Girahim, Koloktos, and Moldarak are all pretty great. Some of them even work to advance the story, and the final battle against Demise is one of the series' all-time bests. But then there's fights like Scaldera, who mostly ignores you, and Tantalus, who is one of the least imaginative and worst visually designed bosses in the series. Not only that, but there are battles that are repeated. With Girahim, it's not so bad, as the battles evolve and change, so if you were to compare the first and third fights against him, they're pretty different. Then there's the Imprisoned, who you also battle 3 times. He doesn't change nearly as much as Girahim, though he does scale in difficulty, but the latter 2 of those battles are placed quite close together, making it feel especially redundant. This issue is only exacerbated by the Thunder Dragon trials, which act as a boss rush mode. So while fighting the Imprisoned 3 times would normally be redundant but forgivable, if you're a completionist, you may have to battle the Imprisoned up to 9 times in a single playthrough. Yeah, I said it. 9 times. The reason being that the Thunder Dragon offers you different rewards depending on how many battles you've won and when you choose to tap out of the boss rush. Among those rewards are mostly money and loot, but he also gives you a piece of heart and the Hylian shield, which is the strongest shield in the game. So if you're going for 100% completion, you will need to go through this trial twice, and the bosses he pits you against are random. So even though you don't have to fight all of the bosses, it's likely that the Imprisoned will pop up once or twice or even all 3 times each time you go into these trials. So something that would have been just a minor complaint ends up being a major issue for many players. So how do we fix this? Well, for starters, some of these bosses, I'm looking at you, Tantalus, could simply have been designed to be visually more threatening. As for the Imprisoned, simply better spacing out the 3 battles that we have to do during the game's main story would go a long way. As for that boss rush mode, since it's optional, it would need a little less work. But I would propose to move that heart piece or make it so that the rewards stack. So that way you'd only have to complete his trial once. At the very least, that would reduce the amount of Imprisoned battles from up to 9 down to 6. So what do you guys think? Do you agree with these criticisms of Skyward Sword? And what else would you do to fix the game? Let me know in the comments below, and remember, even if I have criticisms of the game, it doesn't mean that I hate it. I still think it's a great game that is totally worth playing, but you know, there's always room to improve. Anyways guys, thanks so much for watching. I hope you all have a great day. Bye bye. Thank you so much for watching this video. I just wanted to take a quick second to say thank you to the lovely people who supported me on Patreon, as well as my channel members, in particularly those who supported at the cheese level or higher, which includes Tetra, Brenda, Justin, Callie, Finley, Greymage, Hylian Historian, Gale, and Ethan3G. Thank you so much for the support, you guys, and I will catch you all next time. Bye bye.